I wanted to start by asking you about something you said in Swallowing Geography, which is echoed in a recent poem film you made. You said, it's possible that classic rules of form and structure do not fit this experience of existing and not existing at the same time. And then in the You Are Here film poem you made recently, there's almost a mantra behind it, which is you are here, but not quite here. And I wanted to just ask you to explore that for us a little, that sense of, without compromising presence, of being not entirely or completely or singularly present, perhaps.
So Lavinia's really done her homework. She's been looking at two films I've made. One from a poem, yes, called Nearly Here. I suppose Swallowing Geography I wrote when I was a fellow at Trinity College, Cambridge, and I was I was exploring the idea of a female narrator. It was when the very first Gulf War had started in 1991, and I wanted her to travel Europe with this war beginning to start, so it in a way it's a book about war, and it's a book about identity, and it's a book. It's war as experienced by the narrator J.K. But I guess what interests me most about writing is trying to slip in an absence that the reader can trace. So in a way, it's just about technique. And I was talking about this with my writing group this morning. So, sorry to repeat myself, everyone. If I tell you all about my mother, you might say, and do you have a father? So it's what we leave out of stories that is actually the most interesting. And this is something that I've put to work in all of my work, in all of my books across every form. I try and leave out as much as I possibly can. And I guess the skill is then to have created enough for the reader to absolutely be able to fill in that absence without me having to do so.
Some of the reviews of Swimming Home said things like, the Observer said, the book's special atmosphere stays with you, it rebuffs definition. And the New York Times said, we don't understand for a while. What we don't understand for a while is what sort of novel we're reading. And it isn't a sort of novel at all, but it has that lovely phrase you've just given us, in narrative structure, an absence that the reader can trace, which makes us think about our own preconceptions and so on. And one preconception we have is of genre, and you write across many genres. Do you even think of them as categories?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does the work reveal to you what form it's going to take, or do you think, I would like to write an essay? Does it come out of the subject?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think in categories. I had an idea for a short story here in Berlin, because the hotel doors at the Alexander Plaza Hotel are glass, and they're electronic. So everybody walks close up to them, and they just open a little bit.
Yes. I thought that was personal. I thought that was just the doors didn't like me.
So then you realize that you have to step back. You have to be at a distance from them for them to open. And so, as Lavinia says, I had a few goes going very close, but then I realized that they didn't want me to be so close. They didn't like this intimate relationship, and the only way they'd open is if I took 3 steps back. So I'm cooking up something about that, about distance and intimacy in it, and how I would work. That's absolutely a short story. That's not a novel. And I will name it after the hotel. And I like to start with an image, and I like to start with something concrete. You know, the glass doors. I have to go and take a photo of them when I get back. And I have another short story to write about Schönefeld Airport, and getting stuck there for 6 hours, and going into the currywurst wagon, and trying every currywurst there was for 6 hours, just a tiny little, so that'll just be called Schönefeld Airport. So I've got 2 for Berlin, and those are absolutely not novels.
I wonder if finding such a material anchor is important for you because of one of the things you said about unsettlement, and we talked yesterday a bit about chaos and kind of protecting the sense of chaos, and you talked in the panel discussion, and you said, my overall aim is to get as close to the turbulence that deep thought about anything always creates. And it is an anchor like the doors or the airport, that sort of image, providing you with a yes, an anchor for that.
Yes, in a way. I mean, I might write about chaos, but then, I mean, we all pretty turbulent, all of us. We might pretend to be serene, poised, and calm, but I don't believe you. And you don't need to believe me either. So, but what I actually like, I don't like turbulent sentences. I think there's often some confusion here. I like very clear, that's not the word, I like very concise, simple sentences. That's what I like. For chaos, for turbulence, for complexity. That's my style at the moment. That's what I'm on, that's what I do. So the more complex the inquiry, in fact, the more I want to distill it into something really quite, the more I want the surface to appear to be composed, serene. You can tell from that very first story that I read, and all the rest of it. So it's not a stream of consciousness, it's not some imitation of modernism with big clunking sentences that James Joyce has sort of done anyway. No, that's not what I do, and that's the tension in my work. In this sense, I think it's a little bit like Muriel Spark, who's one of my favorite writers, where she has this formality of expression, kind of colliding with subversive thinking. So it's sort of formal and subversive at the same time, and it's a tone that I'm very fond of. I don't really want, that's all I want to do at the moment in fiction.
Yeah. I'm so delighted to hear you say that, because people often perceive poetry's capacity to formulate uncertainty, chaos, ambivalence, vagueness, as coming out of being uncertain, ambivalent, chaotic, or vague. But poetry is very precise about vagueness. It's very precise about uncertainty. It's like you can't write drunkenly about being drunk. You have to write a brilliantly constructed sentence. And that is it's just lovely to hear you put it so clearly. Things I don't want to know. I had a very strong sense when I was reading the political purpose chapter, which you started there, of a kind of structure, but it was as if the image I got in my head as it moved out from where you were on the mountain trying to get to the hotel to your childhood and so on was a film in reverse of a stone being dropped into a river, because it felt it was a concentric structure, that world and memory and the imagination and the real were existing in a sort of concentric way, but that the movement of the mind was towards that calm surface. So the ripples were actually moving inwards, concentrating, and then disappearing.
Yes, I mean, structure is my subject. It's what I love to get down to. I write in a shed. I hire a writing shed from a friend, and it's under an apple tree. It's not a posh shed. You could keep the lawnmower in it. It's got a desk and a heater and some books, and I take a flask of coffee. And you know, structure is what absolutely fascinates me, but it's not actually what comes first. So what Lavinia is referring to here, something's wrong with the narrator. She's crying on escalators. Why? And I leave that I leave that suspended for the time being. And later, under the heading historical impulse, we discover that what has come to chase her on the escalators in London is South Africa, 1968. So I'm looking at how the past comes to chase us from another country, from another time, in the present, again, this time we have an escalator. And I begin to unfold that particular story. So we started sort of with a middle-aged woman, 50. We go to a 7-year-old girl. We then go to a 15-year-old and back to 50. So we don't, it's not chronological, yeah.
I was intrigued by the escalator image because, of course, it's not like climbing stairs. You are being moved. You are being sort of travelled, which sounds slightly like a word an airline might use or something, sorry. And I wondered if that was your experience of how you think your way into things, or that you are moved through it, or do you deliberately set out and to take a step out of where you're starting, and do you know where you're going?
Everything starts with sort of quite concrete things, like the glass doors, often objects, you know, like the escalators, and the point of the whole escalator sequence is that when escalators were first invented in Massachusetts, they were described as endless conveyors. So something is being conveyed to the narrator, and she doesn't want to know. So Things I Don't Want to Know is a title, are not the things like, you know, a bill, opening a bill or something like that. The things I don't want to know are the things we know anyway, which we repress and push down, but we know them anyway. So that's another subject that I'm always interested in is the things that we know anyway, but don't want to know. So a lot of my work isn't about trying to acquire knowledge, it's about trying to get rid of knowledge.
Or get rid of the knowledge of knowledge, perhaps.
To get two sheds.
Yes, yes, yes. You read Placing a Call, and there's that fantastic image in it of the photograph of the sea, and then right at the end, where is the sea? And there's that question, and it's been revealed that this isn't a connection that can't be made with somebody who's dead, and then this sort of almost impossible question, where is the sea in the photograph of the sea? I found that very potent in terms of thinking about how images surface and how they retain their essence, their purpose, or whatever, and wondered again. Well, you've sort of answered the question because you've talked about how you start with the glass doors and so on. But I was wondering about about certain recurrent images, even emblems, if you like, in your work, such as the dark road at night. You know, when you read when we start reading Swimming Home, we have a car being wildly driven in the dark.
Yes.
It's even more scary in Things I Don't Want to Know, because the man driving the car at night can't see. You say he actually can't see, and then you're lost, and then it's a taxi driver, and then you get out and you start to try and find your way to where you're going through the forest.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in some ways, I'm absolutely fascinated by the structure of thrillers and detective novels, because it seems to me to be a sort of Freudian structure. Someone is murdered, all the suspects are rounded up, they've all got their own secrets, things they want to reveal and things they want to conceal, and the detective has to try and figure out their motivations and find the perpetrator, the murderer, and someone will be punished. You could work endlessly as a writer, subverting that structure. You know, something has been murdered. It can be a person called Henry, but it might also be Hope. It might also be, it could be all sorts of things, and you could apply that structure, that sort of forensic structure, to most things. So, in a way, I work with the old and the new. I want to push the form on, I always have, not in some straining way. I'm so sick of that kind of conversation in a way. But any writer really wants to reach for the best possible way of telling this story. And some of those ways will be old, the ways that I've just described, and some will be new. And so the form is, as far as I can tell, is sort of shunting between the old and the new, something like that. And then it has to be said that the image is always incredibly important to me when I write. It's often the starting point. And so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that I teach writing in art schools. I've taught writing at the Royal College of Art, at the Royal Academy School, and I am visiting professor of writing in illustration, which students are wanting to illustrate stories they are constructing, and I'm there to look at their narrative strategies. So the image for me is always going to make stuff happen. You know, it's the Swimming Home is going to be a film, and it's really interesting talking to the director at the moment, because all I'm hearing are the images he's making from my film, and they are very, very potent. And he is, if anything, pushing them slightly. He's taking the form further. He's making these images more provocative, actually, than they are in the book, in a good way. So, you know.
The other emblem, or I should say element, that comes up a lot in your work is water, and it's coming up. The sea and swimming and so on are coming up in all the work of the writers who are here, and it interests me that we know you're a swimmer. You swim every day, don't you? As Philip does, and there is quite often the swimming pool image. I mean, the obvious one, Swimming Home, and images of home. So Swimming Home gives us that insistence on fluidity, but also your other subject, which is home. Many of your characters are away from home or come from another place, or the whole thing in Swimming Home of being on holiday is just the displacement. And I wondered if you'd like to say a bit about those two things, sort of water and home, and then I'll open it up to the audience.
I mean, if we think about fairy tales, I know Helen's very interested in fairy tales. What's so moving about them? If you just take a story like Hansel and Gretel, the real sort of hardcore Grimm story is that Hansel and Gretel have a resentful stepmother, naturally, and there's a famine in the land, and they can't feed these two children, so they are going to have to be taken into the woods. But what do they do, these children? Even though home isn't a good place to be, they're hungry and they don't like their bullying stepmother, they make a trail of bread. They want to get home. They still make a trail of bread. Home's not a good place for Hansel and Gretel. And then that's thwarted, and the birds eat the bread. So Josef Novogrodsky, in Swimming Home, he slides between these two identities. There's a lot in a name. I'm sure that you all have a number of names or nicknames. He's born in Poland, and when he's 5 years old, in 1939, he's Jewish. He has to leave. His parents tell him they're going to smuggle him through the woods, and he's going to arrive in Whitechapel, London, in 1942. And his parents know they're going to die. And they say to Joseph, their son in the woods, you can never come home. Now, we don't usually say those words with love. We say them in anger. You can go away and never come back. But they said to him with love. And so Joe has got a problem with love. He cheats on his wife, he's a philanderer, but he loves his wife. He really loves her. But he's got a problem with love. So that idea that he can't return home is something that he has to live with and make sense of. And Kitty Finch feels that she is in telepathy with Joe, that she can read his thoughts. And she brings him a poem that she's written called Swimming Home. And there are only 3 lines in that poem that I give the readers from Kitty, and they go like this. My mother says, I'm the only jewel in her crown, but now I've made her tired with all my etc. So now she walks with sticks. There's 3 lines. And Joe has to look at that etc., meaning and other things. Because that's the story. What are the other things? And she's just has ETC. And that is what is explored. What are those other things in Swimming Home? So there we go, the impossibility of getting home, the impossibility of love. And like Muriel Spark, I quite like to insert into a sentence, a very sort of flat sentence, a bit of panic. So when, right from the start, when Kitty Finch took her hand off the steering wheel and told Joe she loved him, he no longer knew if she was threatening him or having a conversation. So I introduced that idea of us being able to threaten each other with love. Blah-de-blah. Fantastic.